Welcome to a new episode of the Warriors Walk. This is a special edition coming from my very own workshop and garage. And so today we're going to be talking about why every Christian man should build something with his hands. So stay tuned. Now, several years ago, I was going through a pretty intense season of ministry. I was working at the church and really just working at that point, probably for about 10 or 15 years I guess about 10 years in ministry, and was really experiencing some major symptoms of burnout. I didn't really understand that at the time. I thought it was just something physically wrong with me. And so I remember I was playing with our boys on their bedroom floor one night and thought I actually had a seizure. And so I had some pretty major symptoms where I would just wake up just feeling like I was on a roller coaster several times a week. And yeah, so just had some really weird symptoms. So I started to go to the doctor. So I was a little bit scared of what they might find. Went to my primary care doctor and they referred me to some other things. They tested me for all different kinds of tick-borne illnesses. They didn't know if I had vertigo, so I had a vertigo test. And then symptoms still kept happening. So finally, I actually had an MRI, which determined that there was nothing wrong. And I remember talking to my neurologist about the symptoms that I had. And basically they had said like, hey, I think it might actually be related to stress. And so at that point, I was just kind of like, okay, so after all these tests, after everything I've been through, like there's not really a clear understanding of what I have. And so he's like, why don't you just take it easy? and so the stress that was caused from just intense ministry for several years in a row had really just built up. And so fast forward a couple weeks later, a couple months go by, and I was encouraged to try to do something physically with my hands, like to work on something that I can see progress on. And so I had a love of bikes all growing up. So I used to race BMX bikes when I was a kid and loved mountain biking and all the different stuff. And then when I got my driver's license as a teenager, that passion turned into working on cars and wrenching and so even in college, some of my buddies, we would swap engines in our cars and all this stuff. And so I had a love for mechanical things, but also for bikes. And I was like, what if we combined both of those? Like, what if I was to build like a motorcycle or build a motorized bicycle? And so I started looking at some of the history of early motorcycling, and it turns out that that's similar to what they were. They were actually bicycles with engines, and then they kept modifying the frames of the bicycles to fit bigger engines, and then they started racing them. And so I started to become fascinated with some of the early motorcycle simplicity and thought, hey, I could take a stab at this. So then I started doing research of building my first board track racer. So a board track racer is a type of motorcycle that was built in the early 1900s that people would race around an actual board track. It was made for bicycles, originally a velodrome, and they started to race them in the early 1900s to the point where the sport became so dangerous that it was outlawed several years later. But this is where we get a lot of our racing pedigree from, like even from NASCAR, like with the high banks. So these were 60-degree embankments. Anyways, I can go into the history of motorcycling because I'm a nerd about it. But when it comes to something physical, I started to put together my first board track racer. And I actually started to feel better. And it was kind of weird because I got my mind off of the daily stresses of just kind of an intangible type of ministry where you don't see like physical progress oftentimes in the spiritual lives of others. And so I actually started building it, and like I noticed that my mental clarity was there. I kind of calmed down a little bit, like I didn't have these symptoms anymore and moved past that season of burnout. And so in many ways, doing something tactile with my hands at that season of my life was life-giving. It was soul-saving. Like it was a way that I could kind of reconnect with something physical and tangible that I can actually see progress as I went on. So I wanted to talk to you guys about just my passion for creativity and the outlet that God used in my life in order to really just restore part of my soul. So it was fascinating because the bike that I have behind me over my shoulder here, I was actually building it. This wasn't the first bike I built. I've built several now. But the first bike, I'm sorry, this bike that I was building, that's over my shoulder, if you're watching this on YouTube, um, I had a hard deadline. So I actually signed up to ride it in a parade, in my hometown parade. And so I knew that I had to finish it by then. So, I mean, I was just wrenching on it and trying to figure out and troubleshoot all the different things, to get it ready. I mean, I think the paint was like still drying and stuff on the day of. And so all that night, before, I had stayed up and kind of put the finishing touches on it. And so I had ridden it around my neighborhood that previous day. And so I was like, okay, great. Like, I'm actually going to have a rideable motorcycle for the parade. And so when I started looking into, getting it all there, like I had to, make sure that I had a truck to, take it there, drop it off in the staging area. And then I'm getting everything ready. I got my family on the parade route. They're going to watch me go by and cheer me on. And so there was this whole big stink about it. Well, so I get there and I'm like, well, before, we go into the actual parade, because I'm going to start it and ride it, during the parade, I was like, let me just take a few laps around and just see if there's any kinks to work out. And so this is a pull start, meaning like you wrap around a rope and then you pull start it kind of like you would like a lawnmower or something. And so I wrapped around, the pull start, pulled it, nothing. And before, like even the day before, it was like, started right away. Started with like the second or third try, no problem. So pulled it again, nothing. Pulled it again, nothing. And I sat there for about 10 or 15 minutes, almost like injuring my shoulder, trying to pull start this thing, and nothing was happening. And so I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the parade's like in 15 minutes, like, and it's not starting. I'm like, this is going to be a huge failure. So then I'm like thinking through, like, what does an engine need to run? Like, is it, oh yeah, gas. Okay. So like I check the gas tank full of gas. I'm like, okay. Sparks. I look at the, spark plug, make sure everything's, connected. And then the final thing is air. So you have fuel, spark, and air. And I look at the air, the air intake, like there's no restrictions, there's nothing. So I'm thinking, what in the world? And finally I look down, and by this time there's like a crowd gathered around, like trying to see if I could start this thing. So they're kind of like interested in it and seeing. And so I actually looked down, and the fuel shutoff valve was switched on. So even though I had fuel in the tank, the fuel wasn't getting to the carburetor to actually start the engine, and so therefore it was not starting. And it was a kind of a nervous, I guess, flub of mine just to not even think to turn on the gas that I already had in the gas tank. And so all that to say is some of you guys watching this might feel like you just can't get started. You feel like you can't troubleshoot what's going on. It might seem so obvious to other people. I'm sure if I had asked some other people around me, they'd be like, oh, you got to turn the fuel on. And what's funny is that I have not been able to start a vehicle because of the fuel shutoff valve since then. All that to say, some of us are feeling like there's symptoms that we just can't figure out. Like we're just not firing on all cylinders, just like I was when I was experiencing extreme burnout. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys and make a case for working on something creatively and that might restore part of what's been lost. And so sometimes it's a simple fix, like just getting started on something simple or making something with your hands, just like it was for me. So I have a couple things prepared during this episode, but really I was just going to go into even the beginning, the first 5 words of the Bible. We see in the beginning God created. So Genesis 1:1, and I remember as a Bible college student, we had to literally take the first 5 words of the Bible and make 25 observations from just those 5 words. And so as we went through that, we had to determine, okay, well, in the beginning, God created. So, okay, God's a creator. So that's an observation. In the beginning, God was there. So he was before the beginning. And so we just went through, I mean, literally, we just, extrapolated everything that we could from Genesis 1:1. But let's not forget that, the first words of the Bible talk about God's very nature of being a creator. And I think when we see that he is a creator, even when we create, even if it's with tools or grease or a garden or a meal, all these different things that we can create, we're stepping into his nature. And you might be saying, well, that's a leap. I mean, God's creative, but doesn't mean that we are. A lot of people say, well, I'm not creative enough to do something like that. Well, Genesis 1:26, God said, let us make man in our image and after his nature. And so after his likeness, God made us in his image. And so if we are made in God's image and God is a creator, I truly believe that when we create, maybe not in the sense of building, a vintage motorcycle replica or anything, but when we create, we actually participate in the very nature of God. And so God is the one who gives creativity and artistic ability. We see this in Exodus 35:35. He gave his people special skills to do the things like carving, designing, sewing, colorful thread, weaving, to build the temple. These people really were good at making with their hands. And God gave them these abilities so that they could create beautiful things that showed how amazing how amazing and powerful God really is. So all that to say, we are serving a creative God. We are made in his image, so therefore we are creators as well. And then God gives us creative ability to glorify him. So we want to point to him. And I think this is so important in a consumer-based society that we live in now, where the tendency, even for us as guys, the vast majority of our audience on here is male, but we tend to avoid hard things by just scrolling, or we tend to consume more media instead of create more to contribute. And we have 4 boys in my family, so we always teach them, as they're interested in, kind of watching YouTube videos or learning something from Dude Perfect or, whatever the YouTube videos that they are watching now. And so one of the things that we emphasize is, hey, try to create more than you consume. And I think that is a huge ability to kind of flip the script on masculinity today. Is, are we going to be known for just scrolling and mindlessly kind of numbing our minds with stuff, or are we going to contribute? Are we going to actually create something that lasts and that matters? So some of the benefits of hands-on work specifically. So some of you guys that might be watching this, you're like, I create spreadsheets, and that is awesome. Like, if God has gifted you to do that, do that. But I think there is some benefit in doing something tactile with your hands, and I'll explain why. So I believe that when you're working with your hands outside of your mind, obviously your mind controls your hands and stuff, but when I'm saying you're working with your hands, there's something that kind of guides your mind, and it brings a little bit of mental clarity. So when I first started building my board track racer, it was like something that, like, when I went into the garage, when I went into to start working on it, and at the time when I first started my first one, we had a townhouse garage, and it was just a very simple setup. We also had to park our car in it, so like I didn't have any room, which is why building the bike was actually a really good space saving option for wrenching. But anyways, it just provided so much mental clarity for me as I kind of went in. Everything else just seemed to fade away in the world. I was able to just focus on accomplishing that one little task that I was set out to do. So maybe it was to mount the engine today. Maybe it was to paint the frame. Maybe it was and I just felt like there was something so calming that brought mental clarity when I would just work something and I can see the tangible progress there. Also, it was spiritual restoration. I mean, the rhythm, the focus, the quiet, it created space for prayer and reflection. And what's kind of weird, it's like you don't think that, building bikes would be something that would be spiritual. But for me, I'm looking at like Colossians, like where, work as if you're working directly for man, like work to glorify God. And so even building a bike, was spiritual for me, and it is spiritual for me, just like anything else. And so when it comes to this idea of spiritual restoration, just that focus and quiet, it created some space, when I got out of the normal hustle and bustle of life, to really just reflect and to spend time making progress on something. And then that brings me to the last thing of benefits of hands-on work is seeing that tangible progress. So in ministry, in life, fruit can feel slow. So it's like, hey, we're called to raise our families. It's like, well, that happens very fast, it seems like, but the progress and the fruitfulness of that seems slow. And we don't see like, okay, I started today, and by the end of today, I actually saw the needle move a little bit. When building something with your hands, it actually, you can see the tangible progress. I remember talking with my father-in-law years ago, who was a school teacher for, I mean, just decades, and he retired as a school teacher. And I just remember asking him, I was like, if you were going to do any other career, like instead of a school teacher, what would you be? He's like, I'd be a landscaper. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, because you could see what you did every day. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of people that I talk to actually have that same kind of mentality. It's like they want to be able to see progress that they work on when they set out to do their work. And so creating something with your hands, it gives you some clarity on just seeing that progress each day. Another thing is stewardship and dominion. So Genesis, there's a Genesis mandate to work the earth. So Genesis 2:15 says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. So this isn't just a hobby. I believe it's a stewardship. And what's fascinating about the type of bikes that I build is that I was just stewarding the creativity, the resources, the ideas that God had given me to build a bike. And what was fascinating is what God grew from it. So I'll just briefly describe. So I'm wearing a hat. You can maybe see it if you're watching the video. It's called Seymour Cycle Works. So I built my first bike and I just enjoyed it. And I remember the first time that I rode it, on its own power. Like I didn't have to push it. I didn't have to, walk next to it. Like I literally was riding the bike around my neighborhood at the time. And I remember this kid flagged me down. Like he waved me down and he's like, where did you get that? And I looked at him and I said, I made it. And I just remember the feeling of, the sense of pride and everything and what I did. But I knew that even just the attention that I got from other people, and it started this conversation, I was like, there might be something here. And so as I started to kind of share this kind of new hobby that I had, I started posting pictures online, like on Instagram. I started an Instagram account, and I started posting pictures of other builds that I was having, other people's builds that I admired, and all this different stuff. Well, come to see, the Lord kind of opened up this interesting dynamic that I didn't expect. People actually liked the stuff that I was doing. And so as I was building other bikes, other people had asked me to build bikes for them. So I'm like, I think I might need to like formally start like a business, just an LLC, like just to kind of make it official. And so I did that. And so I'm posting pictures of these bikes and other people's bikes that I'm admiring. And turns out that not just like a few people like it, there's a lot of people that like it. So in the span of like less than a year, I grew to about 40,000 followers on Instagram. And then like a year kind of stayed by where I was just kind of steady there. I wasn't posting a lot. Well, then I posted some other photos and videos and stuff right around the pandemic. And I went from 40,000 to almost 100,000 followers in the span of a few months. And so I'm thinking, man, this is pretty crazy. And what was happening was I was just seeing how many people I could connect with and even share the gospel with using this newfound love of these old motorcycles. Now, these aren't actual old motorcycles, so these are replicas of the originals. So the originals are extremely expensive, way out of my budget. And so that's why there's like this market, or there's this, kind of appeal for building replicas using modern engines. And so the one that I have behind me, if you're watching the YouTube video, you can actually see it looks old, but it's actually just a few years old. So I built that, and it's using a modern Honda, pressure washer engine, basically. And so all that to say is people were interested in this, and it's given me a platform to actually share the gospel with more people. I think of one guy who, and occasionally on my Instagram stories, like I'll put up, hey, how can I pray for you guys? And then people will respond. Not everybody will, but people will respond. And what's fascinating is there was this guy who was from Italy, who messaged me, and he said, hey, my grandmother, she's going through a lot right now. Like, she's diabetic, and it looks like they're going to have to amputate part of her leg. And so she's really, struggling with it. Can you just pray for her? So I said, you sure? Yeah, I'll be happy to pray for your grandmother. So I thought that was it. So like, I just, I prayed for his grandmother, prayed for him, and then Gets them moving. Well, then a few days later, he sends me a voice recording of him talking. He had a very thick accent, Italian accent, but he was speaking English, of course. And he tells me that he's like, "Hey, I was so blown away by you asking to pray for people that I started looking at like different videos." And so I had posted some videos about like sharing the gospel, sharing my story of being a pastor, and some of what I'm sharing with you guys today. And so he I watched one of those videos, and he was, through this voice recording that he had sent me on Instagram messaging, he was saying, he's like, "Yeah, I watched this video, and because I was just so blown away by, why you would want to pray for someone else," he's like, I ended up giving my life to Christ." And I was thinking, as I'm listening to this, I'm like getting like teared up. I'm like, I didn't do anything. Like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't even like talk to you. Like, and I was just praising God because for some reason, God had led me to, build this vintage, motorcycle tribute and post pictures about it. And that led to someone else seeing it across the world. And then they reached out to me when I prompted it for a prayer request. And then just see the orchestration of all the God details in it was just really fascinating to see. And I say all that to say is that sometimes stewardship, you don't see the full result. And maybe I haven't even seen the full result of what the Lord wants to do through this. I believe that there's still lots of things that he could use this kind of hobby as. But when it comes to, I think when we're mandated to work the earth, I think God has given us a kind of stewardship of the things that he's entrusted us with, the materials, the opportunities. And so sometimes it's not just about our own health, but sometimes taking a step back and doing something with your hands can actually lead to other people's health and impact. And so with that, I believe that we as men, we have a responsibility. We have a legacy. We have a responsibility for masculinity to represent Christ to other people in a godly way. And so for me, this isn't just a hobby. It's a stewardship, and it's taking what God's given me and shaping it with care so that other people may benefit from it. Now, I believe that every man should build something. I believe every man should build something, and that may not be what I'm into. Of course, there's such a variety. I mean, look at all the colors in the sky, like all the variety of leaves on the trees. Look how many bugs and insects there are in the world. God is way too creative for you to do the same thing as me or someone else that you look up to or someone else that you know. And I think we can have the keeping up with the Jones mentality in our area, where it's like, okay, well, my friend does this, so that therefore I have to do, like, I have to be the best person at barbecuing, or I have to have the greenest lawn, or I have to have the best garden, or motorcycle, whatever. And so sometimes we can get caught up in the identity of trying to be like other people, that we don't really see the uniqueness that God has given us to be expressive and creative. But I do believe that every man should build something. And it doesn't have to be a motorcycle. It could be a garden. It could be a shed. It could be a piece of woodworking. It could be a meal. It could just be a legacy. What are you investing in? What are you creating? And the key there is to be intentionally creating, putting your hands to something real, putting your hands to something intentional. You weren't made to just consume. You weren't made to just scroll and mindlessly just consume media. We were made to create, as I mentioned before, that we are created in God's image, who is a creator. And as Scripture says in Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we should walk in them." We are God's creation, fearfully and wonderfully made in his image. Creativity is a practice that invites us to draw closer to our Creator. So if you are in a tough season like I was several years ago, maybe this is the shift or the change that you need to focus on to actually just restore your soul. You don't have to spend a ton of money to get into a new creative hobby. You don't have to do something, but if it seems overwhelming, sometimes that means that we have in our minds that the step to start is just too big. So just take a small step today to work towards creating something that God might use down the road, like he's done for me. So thank you so much for tuning in today. And if you like and subscribe and comment, it always helps other people see our content. This is a new type of content that we're trying out. So if this interests you, just let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. So that if you want us to create more content on location in different places like this, just let us know, and we'd be happy to go that direction. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.